The train screeched into the siding with a metallic scream, brakes biting the Texas dust. German prisoners blinked through the window slats, the heat shimmered, the sky a white sheet of fire. They'd heard the rumors, Amerikaner camps, no mercy. Boots hit gravel, rifle bolts clicked, but the guards didn't shout. They gestured. This way, gentlemen. The first thing that hit them wasn't a whip. It was the smell, soap. Real soap. For a second the prisoners thought it was a trick. Some kind of psychological game. Then a whistle blew and a heavy door creaked open. Steam rolled out like battlefield smoke, curling around the barbed wire. Showers. One of them muttered. Inside the washhouse, the hiss of pipes filled the air. Naked, skeletal men stood in line, trembling, not from cold, but disbelief. Hot water rained from steel nozzles. Steam rose, fogging the glass, the grime of month, sand from Tunisia, sweat from Sicily, fear from Norman. D ran down the drain. By 1945, over 370,000 German POW were held across U.S. soil, spread through more than 500 camps, many in the deep south. The heat alone felt alien, but so did the treatment. According to the Geneva Convention, every prisoner was entitled to hygiene, shelter, and food equal to U.S. troops. Few expected America to follow it. One prisoner later wrote in his diary, "We expected fists. Instead, they gave us towels." Some laughed awkward, nervous laughter, echoing against tile walls. Others cried quietly, soap stinging their eyes. The guards watched from the door, silent, no taunting, no barking, just routine discipline, clockwork, and cleanliness. That night the barracks smelled not of fear, but of pine soap and damp wood. Even the lice seemed to retreat. Outside, the Texas wind rustled the flag, and a stray dog barked at the moon. One soldier stared out through the wire, steam still on his skin. "This can't be real," he whispered in German, "this isn't war." But as the camp lights dimmed, a faint clang echoed, the sound of pipes cooling after hours of running hot water. It wasn't comfort, it was confusion, and tomorrow it would get stranger still, because next came the meal. Steam clouded the room like battlefield fog, thick and white, blurring faces until they were just silhouettes. Men reborn, scrubbing away the dirt of defeat. The hiss of pipes was steady, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. For the first time since capture, the Germans weren't flinching at every sound. They were laughing quiet, startled laughter that echoed off the tiled walls. A sergeant tossed a bar of soap into the crowd. It slid across the wet floor like a grenade, but when it stopped, everyone froze, waiting for the punchline. There was none, just the faint floral scent of something they hadn't smelled in years, real soap, American soap. Back home, baths had become a luxury. In the field, soldiers sometimes went a month or more without washing, their uniforms crusted with mud and oil. But here, in captivity, they were told, showers every day. The first man stepped under the nozzle, eyes shut tight, expecting cold. Instead, a rush of hot water hit his shoulders, he gasped, another followed, then another. Within minutes, the room filled with steam, splashing, even singing. One started humming an old marching tune, another whistled the melody wrong on purpose, and soon the whole barrack sounded alive. The guards outside exchanged glances. They'd seen this before, men breaking down under comfort, not cruelty. One POW, you later wrote in a letter censored, but preserved, they gave us soap with perfume. We hadn't seen lather since Africa. I felt cleaner but smaller, like a lie had washed off me. He wasn't alone. Many German soldiers had been taught that American troops were mongrel, materialistic, without discipline. But here, discipline had a different face, organized, efficient, yet strangely kind. When the pipes shut off, the men lingered, steam rolling down their bare backs, hesitant to leave the warmth. Water pooled around their boots, carrying away filth and fragments of war. The smell of pine lingered like a memory that wouldn't fade. Then silence, just the soft squeak of rubber soles on wet tile. The last prisoner glanced down at the drain, where the soap had slipped from his hand. Through the grate he saw his own reflection warped by ripples blurred, unrecognizable. He crouched, reached toward it, then stopped. Because outside, the mess bell clanged 3 times, and that sound, the promise of food, would change everything next. The bell clanged across the compound, metal on metal, sharp, rhythmic, final. Within minutes, boots scuffed against gravel as prisoners lined up outside the long wooden mess hall. Most still smelled faintly of soap, their hair slicked back, uniforms damp from the showers. The Texas air buzzed with insects and disbelief. Inside, the scene looked like a hallucination. Fluorescent lights flickered over rows of tables set with tin trays and steaming dishes. A sergeant barked orders in English efficient, bored, but the that smell froze them mid-step. Meatloaf, coffee, freshly baked bread with butter that actually melted. One prisoner muttered, "They're fattening us for labor." Another replied, "Then let them." For men who had survived on black bread, watery soup, and the occasional turnip, this was surreal, according to U.S. Army regulations. German POW received 200 calories per day, the same as American troops, and sometimes more than U.S. Civilians struggling with ration coupons. The guards didn't hover, they didn't insult, they just pointed, "Sit, eat." Cutlery clinked. Steam rose from mashed potatoes. Somewhere in the line, a young Luftwaffe pilot stared at his tray, then at the soldier beside him. "We eat better here than at the front," he whispered. The words spread down the table like rumor or revelation. At first, no one dared touch the coffee. It smelled too rich to be real. But when the first man drank, eyes widened. One sip, too, then the silence broke into chatter. Low, rapid, hungry. Every bite tasted wrong, not poisoned, not foreign. Just wrong for prisoners. This wasn't punishment. It was hospitality disguised as logistics. A system so precise it felt insulting to their old world of shortages and hierarchy. A corporal tried to stand, salute the American officer watching nearby. The officer only said, "Eat. You're soldiers. Rules are rules." Later, as trays emptied, men leaned back in disbelief. The noise softened to a hum, forks tapping, chairs creaking, a far-off train horn cutting the night. One POW traced a line in the gravy with his spoon, lost in thought. Outside, the floodlights flickered on, catching the dust in their beams. Somewhere near the kitchen, a tin tray dropped, the sound ringing like a gunshot. Every head turned toward the noise, but it wasn't danger. It was just a guard stacking plates for tomorrow's breakfast. The spoon clinked again, carrying the story forward, into the night and into the question of respect. The next morning began with something even stranger than hot showers or warm meals, a salute. The Texas sun was already punishing, bleaching the camp yard white. POW stood in neat lines for roll call, dust swirling around their boots. On the far end, a U.S. sergeant approached, clipboard in hand. He stopped before a captured German officer, stiff, backed and still proud despite the creased uniform. Then it happened. The sergeant snapped his heels together and said, "Good morning, Herr Lieutenant." The silence that followed felt heavier than gunfire. For a heartbeat, even the cicadas stopped. The German officer blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. Back home, respect was vertical. Officers barked orders. Soldiers obeyed. Fear maintained the system. Here, the enemy was following rules that even his own army had started to abandon. He nodded slowly, responding with quiet confusion, Guten Morgen. In that instant, something cracked not in his posture, but in his understanding. The Americans called it discipline. But to the Germans it looked like contradiction. They were prisoners, yet treated like men. By 1945, over 500 U.S. camps operated under strict adherence to the 1929 Geneva Convention. The order came from the top. Treat them as you'd want your own captured soldiers treated. Guards were trained to maintain military courtesies even toward the enemy. It wasn't sentiment, it was system. Still, the effect was electric. Men who expected humiliation found bureaucracy instead. One POW, you later wrote, an American private called me sir. My general never did. That single word, sir, rattled them more than any interrogation could. It wasn't about kindness. It was about equality under a rulebook that still functioned in chaos. The gesture forced them to face a question they couldn't answer. What kind of power respects its prisoners? As the roll call ended, the guard nodded, marking names, carry on. The officer hesitated, then quietly thanked him in English, his accent brittle but clear. The sergeant just smiled. Rules are rules. That night, the officer stood before the cracked mirror inside the barrack, the reflection sliced by the wire grid. His face was cleaner, his stomach full, his rank meaningless. For the first time he saw not a superior, but a survivor. Outside, the wind rattled the chain. Link fence, a whisper of something unfamiliar, humility. Tomorrow would bring letters. And guilt, the smell of soap lingered long after the showers ended. It clung to the bunks, to the sheets, even to their skin. For many German POW, that scent became a strange reminder proof of how clean captivity could feel, and how dirty their own conscience had become. Night had fallen over the camp, and the barracks were quiet except for the scratch of pens. Rows of men hunched over paper, writing home under the yellow glow of bare bulbs. Their letters were supposed to sound factual health, weather, conditions, but the truth slipped through their words. We are treated well, we have beds, food, and hot water. Each line passed through sensors before traveling across the Atlantic, yet still over 3 million POW letters move through U.S. Army inspection every week. The war machine that once destroyed cities now delivered mail with surgical efficiency. Some letters never made it, others did, and caused disbelief back home. Wives and mothers in Germany wept, thinking their men had gone mad. Warm meals, clean clothes in enemy hands. Inside the camp, guilt grew like mold. The comfort that should have been relief began to sting. A corporal whispered, "How do I tell them we're safe while they freeze?" His bunkmate didn't answer, only folded his letter in silence. The next day, the Red Cross arrived for inspection. Uniforms were clean, medical tents stocked, rations accounted for. Even the American commander looked bored. It was all routine. Yet for the prisoners, every act of civility deepened the wound. In the washroom, a soldier stared at his reflection in a tin basin. He rubbed his hands together until they turned red, trying to scrub away something that wasn't dirt. "I feel guilty for being clean," he murmured in German. No one replied. That night, floodlights swept over the compound, slicing the darkness into white bars. Outside, guards smoked quietly. The sweet smell of tobacco mixing with the soap, sent drifting through cracks in the wood. Inside, 1,000 letters waited in neat stacks, ink still damp. One of them bore a smudge where a droplet of water, or maybe a tear, had blurred the word home. Outside, a generator hummed, powering the camp loudspeakers. In the morning, that hum would change into music, strange, alien, and irresistible. It started with a crackle, then a hiss, then the faint, uneven hum of electricity flowing through old speakers nailed to the barrack beams. The men looked up, expecting orders or propaganda. Instead, a trumpet blared, sharp, bright American. The song was Benny Goodman's Sing, Sing, Sing. Every German in the room froze. The rhythm was unlike anything they knew. Wild, joyful, syncopated. Back home, the Reich had banned degenerate music. Jazz was chaos, un-German, yet here it filled the camp, bouncing off the tin roofs, spilling into the dusty Texas air. A guard grinned from outside the wire. "Entertainment hour," he shouted. "Red Cross rules." Under Geneva Convention terms, prisoners were allowed music, news, and recreation. So the U.S. Army broadcast it daily, but what began as policy became something stranger. Culture shock with a backbeat. One prisoner, a former Wehrmacht radio operator, whispered, "They fight us with rhythm." Another tapped his foot, hesitated, then kept time under the table. Within minutes, shoulders loosened, fingers drummed. Some whistled softly. embarrassed but unable to stop. Reports show that many POW camps ran daily morale broadcasts, mixing American jazz, Allied news, and even short English lessons. It wasn't propaganda, it was immersion. By 1945, German soldiers could hum Glenn Miller tunes they didn't even know the names of. A young guard leaned on the fence, cigarette glowing. "Not bad, huh?" he said. A POW nearby shrugged, half smiling. "Too good," he answered. To men raised on marches and strict order, the music's freedom felt dangerous and magnetic. The steady rhythm of their boots had been replaced by drums that swung. The precision of command dissolved into improvisation. As the record skipped and faded, static filled the silence. The prisoners didn't speak for a while. They just sat, staring at the radio, listening to the hum of the amplifier as if it might say something else. Later that night, as the generator coughed and the speakers clicked off, the last note hung in the air like smoke. Outside, the sky was black velvet, split by headlights. A diesel truck rumbled past, loaded with crates and fuel cans. The music was gone, but the rhythm lingered, in footsteps, in heartbeats, in thoughts that wouldn't quite settle. Tomorrow they'd see where all that sound came from, America's endless supply. Dawn came with the sound of engines deep, throaty, confident. The kind of sound that didn't just move supplies, it moved history. A convoy of olive-green trucks rolled past the fence line, sunlight flashing off metal as far as the eye could see. The POW had been assigned to unloading duty that day. It was supposed to be routine labor stacking crates, rolling barrels, hauling lumber. But what they saw inside those trucks hit harder than any propaganda leaflet. Crates of unused tools. Stacks of shovels still wrapped in wax paper. Brand. New wrenches shining under the Texas sun. Boxes stamped with bold letters. U.S. Army Supply Corps. A German engineer, once proud of his precision factories back home, just stared, unused. He muttered, "They have so much, they don't even open them." The numbers were staggering. By war's end, the United States had produced over 300 aircraft too, 4 million trucks, and enough cargo ships to circle the globe with steel. Germany, even at its industrial peak, made barely half. The POW lifted crate after crate, but their minds weren't on the work. Every bolt, every tire, every can of fuel whispered the same message: you never stood a chance. One of the American guards caught their expressions and said, half joking, "We like to keep extras." The prisoners laughed nervously, but inside, the laughter burned. As they worked, the heat shimmered over the endless field of tents and machinery. Diesel fumes mixed with the smell of tar and sun, baked wood. Somewhere down the line, a truck backfire, loud, sudden, like an artillery blast. A few men ducked instinctively, then felt foolish for doing so. Later, while stacking the last row of crates, one soldier noticed the label on a wooden box, Lux Soap 48 bars. He froze. The same kind that had appeared in their showers weeks earlier. He ran his fingers over the printed letters, almost reverently. "They ship this across an ocean," he whispered. "We can't even ship bread." When the day's work ended, the prisoners sat in the shade, watching the convoy roll out again. The dust hung in the air like a curtain, and through it, the outline of one truck lingered longer than the rest, the one carrying soap. That night, one POW would trade something for a bar of that same soap. Night settled soft and humid over the camp. The air smelled of dust and diesel, but inside the barracks another scent dominated Lux. American soap. Smooth, perfumed, absurdly civilized. The bar had come from a trade earlier that evening. One carved chess piece for one precious rectangle of luxury. The deal went down quietly between two prisoners hunched near the stove. No guards interfered. Barter was unofficially tolerated as long as it didn't cause fights. The man who made the trade, Schneider, a former theology student turned infantryman, held the soap like a relic. The word LUX was pressed deep into its surface, golden under the lamplight. Lux Latin for light. The irony didn't escape him. In a world that had gone mad, this little bar meant order, grace, even forgiveness. He rubbed it between his palms, inhaled. For a second, he wasn't a prisoner, he was human again. Across the barrack, a guard passed by, humming a tune from the radio. Schneider barely noticed. He was lost in memory. His mother's kitchen, the smell of clean laundry, the way sunlight hit soap bubbles in a sink. All the small domestic things that Nazi ideology had told him were weakness. Now weakness felt like salvation. Reports from POW camps describe entire barter economies revolving around soap. In some, a single bar was worth 2 packs of cigarettes or a week's rations. Hygiene had become currency, comfort turned into faith. One prisoner joked, in America, they fight with machines. In here, they convert us with cleanliness. Another replied quietly, maybe that's the point. As the night deepened, Schneider placed the soap carefully beside his bunk, like a sacred object. Around him, snores and murmured dreams filled the air. The camp generator coughed, lights dimmed, and the world outside returned to its familiar rhythm of trucks and night creatures. On a nearby table, a carved chess knight tipped over with a soft clatter. The move was unintentional, but it felt like a sign. The game was changing, just not the one on the board. Then, from the radio shack near the fence, a crackle, another transmission warming up. News, maybe, or music. The prisoners lifted their heads. The sound meant letters were coming, messages from another world. The mail truck arrived at sunrise, rattling across the gravel like an omen. Dust trailed behind it, curling through the fence as prisoners gathered, pretending not to care. But everyone was listening for their name. Each letter came stamped with Red Cross seals, edges creased from the long Atlantic journey. The camp interpreter read them aloud first, checking for code words, before handing them to their owners. Even censorship had its rhythm now, another system running perfectly. One by one, men opened envelopes with trembling hands. The handwriting alone could undo them. We hear the bombs every night. Your sister's school was hit. We have no coal, no milk. The words smelled of smoke and desperation. Across the ocean, Germany was in ruins. Entire cities, Hamburg, Dresden, Cologne, flattened, water systems gone. Trains halted. By 1945, Allied bombing had destroyed over 75% of German infrastructure. Yet here in Texas, the men writing back described warm beds, coffee, and soap. It felt obscene. One letter home read, "We are treated well, maybe too well. I cannot explain it." When the letter reached his mother, she showed it to a neighbor, who said it must be propaganda. How could the enemy feed their sons better than their own government? But the letters kept coming. Over 10 million by war's end, carried by the International Red Cross, an invisible lifeline between comfort and collapse. At dusk, one POW sat near the fence, reading his letter under the floodlights. His mother's words were blurred by rain, but one sentence stayed clear: "Stay alive. The world will need decency again." He folded the paper carefully, sliding it into his shirt pocket close to the heart. Around him, others burned their letters in tin cans, afraid of the guilt that came with comfort. Smoke curled upward, carrying fragments of ink, names, towns, prayers, back toward a country they no longer recognized. Inside, Schneider, the man with the Lux soap, watched the ashes drift. His bunkmate whispered, "She didn't believe me, said I was lying." Schneider just nodded. "Maybe it's better she doesn't." The guard blew a whistle, lights out. The last flames flickered, reflecting in their eyes. And in that dim orange glow, one question lingered. If kindness from the enemy was real, what did that make them now? Tomorrow they'd find out when work began. The morning whistle blew before sunrise. Boots hit dirt and the POW filed out in work detail columns, still half asleep, clutching canteens and cloth caps. The air smelled of dew and diesel. Trucks idled by the gate, waiting to take them beyond the wire. Destination, cotton fields. Under the Geneva Convention, prisoners were allowed and even required to work as long as it wasn't war-related. The US needed labor, farms needed hands, and the German captives needed purpose. It was the strangest alliance imaginable. By 1945, tens of thousands of German POW worked across U.S. farms and factories, earning 80 cents per day in camp credits. They could spend it at the canteen on candy, stationery, even cigarettes. Freedom's illusion, priced at pocket change. The convoy rattled through small Texas towns. Locals paused to stare, some curious, some hostile. Children waved. A farmer spat into the dust and said, "They look just like us." In the fields the sun turned brutal. POW picked cotton beside Mexican laborers and African-American workers, all sweating under the same indifferent sky. Rank meant nothing here. The former Wehrmacht officers stooped beside privates, pulling white tufts from thorny plants, backs burning, hands bleeding. One prisoner laughed bitterly, "So this is equality." A black field hand looked over and said flatly, "You get to go home," then turned back to work. That line hung in the air longer than the heat. Lunch was simple bread, beans, water. But it was eaten together, no fences in sight. For a few hours, the war felt like it belonged to another planet. The rhythm of labor replaced the rhythm of guns. In the evening, trucks carried them back to camp, dust, caked and exhausted. At the gate, a guard checked them off, same routine as every day. But inside their pockets, some men carried folded pay slips, tiny proof that the enemy had given them wages, not wounds. Back in the barracks, Schneider used his credits to buy a postcard blank, clean, smelling faintly of cardboard and ink. He stared at it for a long time, unsure what to write. Outside, the night hummed with crickets and the low whir of a generator powering the lights in the education hut. Tomorrow, they said, classes would begin. English lessons, and words more than work, would start undoing everything they'd been taught. By the time the floodlights flickered on that evening, the barracks had turned into a classroom. Wooden tables became desks. Chalk squeaked across a scavenged blackboard, and for the first time, the prisoners weren't learning how to fight. They were learning how to speak. "Repeat after me," said the American instructor, a soft, spoken corporal with an Oklahoma drawl. "Trust, home, peace." Dozens of voices echoed back, hesitant but eager. "Trust, home, peace." Some smiled, embarrassed by their accents. Others frowned, concentrating as if the words themselves were riddles. For many they were. By 1945, over 25,000 German POW attended education programs in U.S. camps. They studied English, mathematics, even philosophy taught by volunteer American officers, or captured professors from among their own ranks. It wasn't indoctrination, it was exposure, to ideas, to empathy, to the simple power of conversation. Schneider sat near the front, his Lux soap bar resting in his pocket like a charm. When asked to use a word in a sentence, he hesitated, then said, "Trust is difficult." The room chuckled softly. The corporal just nodded. "That's the most honest answer I've heard all week." In between lessons, the soldiers shared stories. Of farms in Bavaria, of frozen nights on the Russian front, of brothers lost at Stalingrad. The guards listened too, sometimes leaning in the doorway, pretending they weren't moved. Language did what no sermon or lecture could. It broke down the walls they'd built inside themselves. At the end of each session, the corporal handed out slips of paper with vocabulary lists. One word stood out every time, home. Some traced it with their fingers like scripture. As the class ended, Schneider lingered, asking quietly, "Why do you teach us this?" The corporal shrugged. "Because someday you'll need the words to explain what happened here." Later that night, the barracks glowed dimly with lantern light. Men practiced English phrases under their breath, the words blending with the chirp of crickets outside. "Good night, thank you, my friend." A single bulb flickered overhead, and the generator groaned once before cutting off. The room fell into darkness, voices fading mid-sentence, but the words didn't vanish. They stayed alive, carried on breath, on memory, on the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, language could rebuild something war had broken. In the morning, another sound would take over, the train whistle. The train whistle came before dawn, a long, mournful sound that sliced through the quiet camp like a blade through fog. Every man who heard it knew what it meant. The gates were opening. It was 1946. The war was over, Germany in ruins, and America was ready to send her prisoners home. For months, rumors had spread through the camp like wildfire. Some would be shipped to England for labor, others sent straight back across the Atlantic. Nobody knew for sure until the trucks rolled in that morning, headlights cutting through the mist. Guards moved briskly, calling names from a clipboard. No one cheered. There was relief, yes, but also something heavier, something close to sorrow. After years of captivity, the wire had become routine. Predictable, safe, Schneider stood near the front, his duffel light. Just a few photos, a folded shirt, and a tiny bar of Lux soap wrapped in cloth. The guard, who'd once taught him English, walked past, offering a nod instead of words. "Good luck," he mouthed. Schneider nodded back. Outside the gate, the departing group gathered in silence. Trucks rumbled, exhaust fumes mixing with the sharp scent of pine and dust. Some POW touched the barbed wire before stepping through, as if it were a monument cold, cruel, but familiar. Records show that repatriation of German POW continued until 1947, though many nearly 5,000 men chose to stay in America voluntarily, finding work and homes in the country that had once been enemy. For those returning, the journey felt less like liberation and more like waking from a long, strange dream. As Schneider climbed into the truck bed, he looked back at the camp. The showers, the mess hall, the classroom, all faded into the golden Texas light. The guards stood at ease, rifles slung, faces unreadable, no salutes, no speeches, just quiet. The truck jolted forward. Behind him, the gate swung shut with a soft metallic clang. The same sound they'd made every night for years, but now final. He didn't wave, he just held the bar of soap in his hand, feeling its smooth edges warm in his palm. The label had worn off, but the scent remained a faint reminder of something impossible. As the convoy disappeared down the dirt road, the whistle blew again, echoing into silence. And somewhere far away, that silence would meet its echo, in a country that no longer smelled like home. The train rolled through what used to be Germany, a ghost country stitched together by ruin. Smoke rose from hollow, doubt towns. Roofs were gone, chimneys stood like broken teeth. Fields lay dead under frost. For the returning prisoners, it felt like stepping backward in time into the wreckage of their own past. When Schneider finally arrived in his hometown, the silence was worse than any gunfire. The station was half collapsed. His mother's house gone. In its place, a crater filled with stagnant rainwater. He stood there for minutes, unable to move, the small bar of Lux soap clutched in his coat pocket. He hadn't expected comfort, but he hadn't expected this emptiness either. No power, no heat, no clean water. The average German family in 1946 received less than 100 calories a day, half of what he'd eaten as a prisoner. Cities ran on ration cards and candles. People traded furniture for bread, shoes for coal. When he finally found a neighbor, she didn't recognize him at first. Too thin, too changed. "You survived America?" she asked. He nodded. "Then you were lucky." Lucky, the word stung. He pulled the soap from his pocket and placed it on the cracked windowsill of his ruined home. The wrapper had faded, but the smell was still there. Sweet, artificial, clean. He rubbed it once between his palms. The foam rose instantly, white against his dirt. Streaked hands. For a moment the years folded together. The shower steam, the guard's salute, the radio jazz, the English word peace. All of it felt impossibly distant, like a story from another life. He looked out at the rubble, strewn street where children played with bits of twisted metal. The air smelled of ash and boiled cabbage, yet somewhere, faintly, that scent of soap lingered. A ghost of something decent that refused to die. "Is this heaven?" he whispered, half in irony, half in exhaustion. No one answered. That night, he washed his face with the last sliver of Lux. The water was cold, the basin chipped, but the gesture was pure habit, now a ritual he couldn't abandon. As he rinsed, the foam slid down the drain, taking nothing with it. Outside, snow began to fall slow, silent, merciful. Clean skin, dirty world, and a memory that would never wash off.